You've had an incredible morning. In fact, you've had one of those mornings that you're going to remember and talk about for the rest of your life. You've heard some stuff, and you're all nodding your heads, right? Did you have a morning that you're going to remember for the rest of your life? In fact, if you've had that kind of a morning, just for a couple of seconds, if you've had that kind of a morning, stand up. Okay. You've had that kind of a morning because you're full of energy. I wanted you to stand up for a couple of reasons, because I want you to know that you're about to get some information that has the chance to do what the First Lady said it can do. I want you to stretch out for a little bit. I want to tell you why you're all part of a moment in history that can change the world. You know that. You knew that before you got here. And the United Nations is helping make it happen. Sit down, because this morning you'll talk about for the rest of your life, and this is a morning where you'll be able to say, global goals this year came together. And I was there listening to leaders like Michelle Obama, like some of the amazing leaders you just heard, and some of the people that you're going to meet later on. And we're going to talk for the next couple of minutes, if you can stay with me. We're going to talk for the next couple of minutes about why global goals are good for girls, and about why in this particular year, 2015, was a year that we're going to be talking about for the rest of history, because it was a turning point. It's a moment when something happened, and girls like you, people like you with a global perspective, were able to change history. So you're with me? Okay, at the end of this, you're going to be able to go out to the next session and explain why 2015 was a year that changed history. And who is it that changed the history? I should see every one of your hands. Who is it that changed history? All of you. This is why. A lot of things are going on, because 2015 is trying to tell you something very, very big. 2015, when we all ripped off the calendars, a couple of people thought, wow, this is my year to do a couple of things. I thought this was my year I was going to lose a couple pounds, start my modeling career. A couple of people turned off the calendar and thought, this is the year when I'm going to, do something major. I'm going to make a career move. I'm going to really dive into something for study. But 2015, when we all ripped off the calendar in January, 2015 is the year where we decided that we were going to come together en masse. In fact, behind me is a picture of a massive concert that took place in New York City, and a big concert that took place here in Washington, D.C. There was a little something called the Global Citizen Festival. Do any of you remember that? Some of you are nodding your head. Some of you were there. How many of you remember hearing about it? Give me your hands. Okay, so a lot of you heard about this thing, right? Global Citizen, a great chance to come together. Well, I went there, and I went to the Global Citizen Festival in Washington, D.C., and I went there, and I had a special companion. Some of you are trying to find yourself. But I went there and I learned about some things. I'm going to tell you about who I was with. Let me tell you the story. I went to this Global Citizen Festival surrounded by gazillions of people, and I heard about things like poverty, like the millions of girls who want to go to school but can't, like the millions of women who want to go have a baby and want to do it in a way that brings the baby to the world in a healthy way. They want to survive childbirth. I went and I heard with my companion about climate change and how things are happening that we've got to address. I went there and found out that there are millions of people around the world that want to be part of a just society. And as I'm sitting there with my companion, a girl, a 9-year-old girl, she's hearing about these things. And this girl is hearing about climate change and what it means. And she's hearing about the fact that girls want to learn but can't. And this girl was standing there next to me, this 9-year-old girl, and she started doing something. She took out a pencil. And she started taking notes. And she started writing down about these problems. And at first it moved me, because this little girl's my daughter. But in her eyes was not excitement. In her eyes was a lot of frustration. Because she was learning about the fact that we live in a world where there's climate change, and where girls want to go to school but can't, and where there are people who are forced to get married instead of choosing when to get married. And she was learning about these problems, and she was taking notes. And I didn't tell her to take out her pencil. She took out her pencil, and she had it in her little purse, and she started taking notes. And this little girl turned to me, and she asked a couple of key questions. She asked some questions, and they were, Dad, you're like 90. How long have you known about this? What are we doing about all this? And the second question that blew me away: how will we know it's working if we're working on these things? So listen to the two questions. What are we doing about it? How will we know it's working? So we can talk all we want about this stuff. But a 9-year-old girl, my daughter, taught me a key question. Unless we have a plan, unless we've got a to-do list, And unless we're measuring it, we can talk all we want. Do you agree with me? You can have a nice wish. I can want to do something, but unless I've got the list, unless I've got the measurements, unless I can find out, are we making progress, then we're not doing anything. We're just talking. But the world is doing it. And in 2015, we're asking ourselves these two questions. What are we going to do about it? And how will we know it's working? 2015, this year, your year, is a year when new global goals are coming together that will answer these two questions from that little girl. What are we going to do about it? How will we know it's working? 2015 could be, is the communications opportunity of a generation. Because there's a new set of goals. Let's talk about them for a minute. By the way, this is happening in a time when everything has changed. Everything has changed because your parents and your friends and your teachers and your supporters, they grew up in a world where you could talk about global goals. And they lived in a world that was different because what we're going to do is we're going to watch for a minute about how that new world has a chance to connect people. Watch this for a second and see if you agree that everything has changed.
Song exactly.
As we're watching this, and I love watching this video, but even more than that, I love watching each of you as you watch it. Because you're seeing two things. Do I want to be in a world in 15 years when we're talking about digging graves because people were not able to live the life they wanted to live? Or am I digging roads? Are we scoring goals on the soccer field? Or are we doing something else? There's a new set of global goals that will help you decide where you are in 15 years. We're going to talk about those in a minute. So we're going to move forward for a sec, and we're going to tell you about, can we move forward for the next slide here? We're going to talk for a minute about how those goals are coming together and how you're going to be a part of it. A couple of years ago, there was a new pope in Rome in 2005, and this was the picture of that. Some of you remember that. But there was another pope in 2013, and look at the difference in the picture. Do you notice the difference? Do you notice the difference? Whoa. Something amazing happened. You happened. And your phones happened. And these new global goals are taking place in a time when you've got that in your hand. So something's being born this year, and these are these new global goals. And in your hand, you have the ability to say, much like the First Lady reminded us, I'm passionate about this. I want this to take place. I want to live in a world where girls and women everywhere can live the life that they want. So that instead of talking about digging graves, we can talk about digging roads and building schools. This is a place called the United Nations, and you all know about the United Nations. And for many years, the United Nations was an amazing institution that people thought, oh, someday I want to get there. Well, guess what? You're there. Because via social media and the chance to talk about these goals and to be a part of the Girl Up campaign, this is what it looks like to be inside the UN right now, inside of meetings that talk about it and get people excited about it and say to people, I care about it. Because in 2015, there's a bunch of summits happening, my friends, big moments where these new global goals are going to be outlined and introduced to the world, and you're going to be a part of it. And those moments are happening in New York City and at the end of the year in Paris. And world leaders are going to come together and say, yup, we're on board. We've got a list so that we can measure what we're doing about it and how we will know if we're making progress. So whether it's New York or Paris, you need to know that 2015 was a year where there were life-changing, history-making summit meetings. You're alive during that kind of a moment. And you live maybe not in Paris, but on Main Street, and you need to let people know that what happens in New York City or in Paris at a summit meeting is important to where you live on your street. Those are the connections. And there's some movements that are taking place that you should be watching. We want you to know about them. We want you to hear these phrases because you've said them to us. You've said, we want new goals. We want the world to be working on new, good goals. And the UN heard that, and they listened to you. They listened to millions of people, in fact, who said, we want these new goals. We want them to take shape. We want sustainable development goals. We want goals around things that we can rally around, to end hunger, to end poverty, to create a better world. In fact, they went and they surveyed millions of you and said, if you could tell the world leaders what they wanted, what would it be? What would be the things they did? And they came up with data like this, where we could listen to girls around the world, where we could listen to their parents, where we could listen to leaders of communities large and small. And they came up with a list that included these things that you care about. In 15 years, in 2030, I want to make sure I've had a good education. I want to make sure my family's had health care. I want to make sure I've got the chance to have a great job. I want to make sure the chance that I live in a place where my government is listening to me. They came up with some new goals. Not because they made them up in a vacuum, but because they listened to you in that world where everyone has one of these in their hand, and everyone is saying, I'm watching you, and everyone's also saying, I'm part of this. See what it means? Your selfie says a lot more than I was here. Your selfie says, I'm going to be here in 2030. What are we doing about it? How will we know it's working? So the global goals are going to be born in a year when you're here. And your selfie says a lot, because your selfie says, I was here taking a picture of myself, marking it for history, because I looked good. And in my case, I think I look okay today. I had a helper getting ready. But because you can say, I was here on the earth when the new goals were deciding that we were going to do more than just talk about it. So the global goals are here, my friends. You know about them before millions of other people do. And this room knows about something that people are just now learning about. You're learning about this. You're one of the first rooms to see the fact that the world has a to-do list. And the United Nations, the leaders of every country, are going to come together and they're going to say, we want targets. We want to know how we're going to go and combat poverty. We want to know how to make sure that whether it be in Goal 5, that girls have the chance to learn the same ways that boys have the chance to learn. We want to know that we live in a place where there can be jobs for people who need and want jobs. We want to know that we're taking care of our planet and that we're not just talking about climate change, but doing something about climate change. This is a list that you in 15 years will be able to say, I was alive. In fact, I was at the Girl Up Leadership Summit when they gave me a sneak peek at what the global leaders, the world's leaders were taking a look at. You're going to be able to say in 15 years, I saw it first. And I was a part of it. The global goals are a moment for us to say, hey, world leaders, we're a part of this. Do you recognize some things that you're passionate about in this list? I know you do. I know you do because I know you care as the Girl Up community about the people with you, and I know that you know there's no way you can live in a world where girls are safe to go to school if you don't look at all the other things. They're connected, and they're together, and the UN is on that. You've said this phrase, I know you can hear us. I know, Mr. President, I know, Madam President, I know, Mr. Prime Minister, I know, Madam Prime Minister, I know, Member of Congress, that you can hear us. Because you do this. You sit here, and instead of just listening, you let other people in. You told them this morning you cared about girls' education. And so in a city like Washington, that makes a difference. In a city like Washington, it makes a difference in moving forward on these issues. In a city like Hong Kong, It can change things. And you've said, they're not your goals, they are ours. They are goals that belong to all of us. Because in 2015, I want you to do some math. I'm going to choose a couple of you. How old are you here in the front row? How old are you? 15. Una quinceañera here with us. So we have a 15-year-old. And in 2030, how old will you be? 30 años. In 15 years, you're going to be 30. Do some math. How old will you be in 2030? These goals don't belong to me. These goals belong to you. In fact, they even belong to a girl who was born on October 31st, 2011. Do you remember where you were on Halloween? I do. I even remember what my costume was that year. On Halloween in 2011, something happened. And as I wrap up my remarks today, I want you to understand why and how a girl that you've never met before changed your life. On October 31st, 2011, there was a girl who was exactly this old. There was a girl who was born in the Philippines. She was person number 7 billion. You might not remember this, but on October 31st, 2011, the 7 billionth person was born on our planet. Our planet has never had so many people on it. And the news loved it. Oh, headlines everywhere. 7 billion people, 7 billion people. We just hit 7 billion people. Do any of you remember this? A couple of you are shaking your heads. Do you remember that moment? Sometimes some of your teachers might have done a lesson around it. There was a lot of social media about it. There were 7 billion people in the world. Huge news. That's not the story. Not the story at all. Do you know what the story is about baby 7 billion who was born? That little cute baby who was born in the Philippines? The big news was that the world has never been younger. So in our history now, we can say that 43% of our planet is under 25. So when we're talking to you, young people of the world, we're talking to the youngest world we've ever had and the most amazing power of 7 billion people who are under the age of 25. 43% of you. Look at the zeros. What could a group like that do if they came together around the global goals? You are people who want to tell your own story. You are people who are not content to let us, those of us who are older, who've been around the block a couple of times, you're not content to let us make your history for you. You want to know that we're doing something about it. And you want to know that we're measuring it. What are we doing about it, and how will we know that we're making a difference? So, to my friends here, we're going to end with a final story if we can, and I'm going to wrap it. But I want to acknowledge to you that we know that we're living in a totally different era. These aren't my goals. These aren't the UN's goals. They're really your goals. They're our goals. They're goals together. We live in an era where you want to tell your story and you want to write your own history. And someone taught me that, and an unexpected person taught me this. He's a guy that wears this hat. Does anyone recognize this hat? We at the UN Foundation got to work with Pharrell. And he taught us a story, and I'm going to tell you the story very quickly because it changed my life. We were working with Pharrell on something called the International Day of Happiness because he wrote a little song. 2 of you might have heard about it. It was called Happy. Do you remember it? It's the most powerful song in the world. It was everywhere. And it happened, an International Day of Happiness happened the day that a major typhoon hit the Philippines. And we thought, what should we do? Should we cancel? It's a song about happiness and celebrating happiness. But it's also a song that could do a lot of good, but something really sad just happened. So we decided to do it, and we're going to go ahead with it. But then we got a phone call, and someone said, Aaron, in fact, a couple of you in this room were here. And they said, there's a message from the Philippines. They're going to release a video about Happy Day. What should we do? And I thought they're probably going to release a video saying, what are you doing? Why are you talking about happiness when my home was just destroyed, when my school was just destroyed? So we sat and we waited, and we got ready, and we thought about, should we apologize? What should we do? And I'm going to show you just a couple of seconds, so I'm going to ask you to stop the video once we start. I'm going to ask you the message that came to us from the Philippines. Let's watch the video about what happened from the Philippines. Were you able to pull up? Put yourself in my shoes while you're waiting for this video to come on. You're sitting there with your colleagues. and a video is about to come up for the Philippines. If not, can you go to the next screen that shows a picture of it, a little glimpse? Do you see what they started sending? What did they send pictures of? They sent pictures of people responding to the crisis, dancing to the song Happy. This is not what we thought we would see. We never in a million years thought we would see a moment where people were dancing to a song called Happy. But they sent a message to us saying, we're going to dance and show the people responding to the crisis. And we're going to dance and we're going to tell our own story, because this isn't your story to tell. We're going to show, if it brings millions of people into our story, if it brings millions of people into our home, that we're the ones telling the story of our own future. And so your day, your happy day, go and do it. And if it tells people our story, because we're the ones controlling the story, then we love it. That's the era in which we live right now. Storytelling is a powerful force. Storytelling is a force that you've got because you're deciding that with issues this big, you're the ones that want to be the ambassadors for your 2030. You've decided that you're the ones in an era like this who are going to make the difference and who are going to be a global force for global good. You've made that decision as members of the Girl Up community. You're the type of girls that take a girl by the arm and say, come with me. You're the type of people who say, I want everyone to know about this, because what are we doing about it and how will we know if it's working is part of a global goals moment. The global goals are going to be born this year. You're going to be part of it. We want you to be excited about the fact that the world in 2030 is going to be asking itself the question, what did we do, and how did these new global goalistas help us get there? People who know that it's cool to be engaged, it's smart to be engaged, it's urgent to be engaged. People who realized that 2015 was a great year, and my friends of the Girl Up community, people who decided that they were going to tell the story about 2030. We can't wait to get there with you. We can't wait to meet the goals with you. We can't wait to do it, but it requires you to make sure that everyone knows that the world has never been bigger, but because of you, the world has never had a better chance to get to the goals. Thanks for helping us get there together.